The Seven Wonders of Sassafras Springs by Betty G. Burney. Cully Pone's story, The Rainmaker's Revenge. This here bookcase once held the secrets of the universe, and it saved a couple of lives to boot. You probably never heard of Henry Upton, but folks up in Garnerville did. That's in Garner County on the Garner River, about 50 miles north of here. Say, they like the name Garner there, don't they? They had themselves a grand old drought when I was a boy. 1 year was dry, the second year was drier. The third year, there wasn't enough rain to wet a postage stamp. The famous Garner County corn was as shriveled as that dead old tree stump out front, and the river had no more water in it than you could squeeze out of a rock. Things looked bad for the farmers, I tell you that. Around that time, a fella called Henry Upton moved to town, and nobody'd seen the likes of him before. He wore a genuine top hat like Honest Abe Lincoln. He was president once, you know. Some said Upton was a professor. Some said he was a traveling magician. Some said he was the son of one of the richest families back east. He moved into a cabin up on Rooster Ridge, the highest point in Garner County. Brought along a wagon load of fancy furniture, crystal lamps, horsehair sofas and such, and he brought this here bookcase. Might have looked fancier then, but it's the same one. The shelves were crammed with books, and the spaces where there weren't any books were filled with jars and bottles of smelly crystals and cloudy liquids. He didn't work the land, just read all day long. Uppity Upton, they called him from the start. Yes, sirree, one day this Uppity Upton took himself down to the Garnerville Town Hall and walked right into the town board meeting like he was invited, which he was not. He stood there with a big smile on his face and made the board an offer. He promised to make it rain on Garner County. If he did, they'd have to pay him $500 an inch. He guaranteed them 10 inches for $5,000. Those board members thought he was funny in the head. Even the mayor broke down and laughed. "What are you going to do, Uppity? A rain dance?" Henry Upton had long, gangly arms and legs and a round middle, so the idea of him dancing had the whole town board laughing. Uppity stayed calm and waited till they quieted down. Then he said he was going to use scientific methods. That made the board members hoot and holler to beat the band. Uppity raised his arms to quiet them down. "You only pay me if you get results," he told them. "You can't lose on the deal." Whoa, Nellie, that got them to thinking. Some of them were ready to sign him right up. The mayor argued that even if it did rain, there was no way Upton could prove it was cause of him, and not the Lord God Almighty. Uppity got real uppity and said, "Apparently the Lord God Almighty hasn't seen fit to make it rain around here so far. How much longer are you willing to wait?" Yee-haw, that got the Garnerville Town Board folks thinking. Some say they couldn't afford to let their corn crops wither away. Others said that it was wrong to fool with nature. Some said Upton was a crackpot, said it right to his face. The place was in an uproar and Upton's face grew purple. "Does this mean you're turning down my deal?" he asked. The mayor stood up and looked at Upton eyeball to eyeball. "You're dad-burned right we're turning down you and your harebrained scheme." And with that, Upton left, mad enough to bust his fancy gold buttons. The next morning, he built a platform on Rooster Ridge. He built a brick fireplace with a huge chimney pointing straight up at the cloudless sky. And over the platform, he built a roof to protect the fire from rain. Which there was none, of course. It was like a house without walls. Next, he built a fire and started pouring strange, smelly powders onto the flames. Smoke the colors of the rainbow rose up out of that fire and kept on rising all the way up to the sky. Yes, indeed, he rose halfway to heaven. The folks around Garnerville were watching every move he made. They saw him take a cot out on the platform and some blankets, and by Jehoshaphat, he slept there all night, getting up to add his secret potion every few hours. That fire never went out, morning to night, night to morning. Exactly 48 hours after the fires began, the clouds rolled in over Garner County. Those clouds opened up and poured down rain. It didn't rain cats and dogs. It rained cows and horses, lions and tigers. Boy, it rained elephants and giraffes. The Garner River began to rise. The seed corn began to sprout. They were celebrating in the kitchen of every farmhouse for 50 miles. Uppity gave the town board a bill for the first 5 inches. And did they pay Uppity? Oh, they talked about it. While the rain gushed down, they chatted. While the brownstone bridge washed out, they discussed. While the sprouted seed corn washed away, they argued. While 2 farmhouses slid into the Garner River, they debated. Meanwhile, Henry Upton kept that fire a-burning night and day, and the rain kept pouring down. Finally, one day he stopped long enough to trot down to the board meeting, which had been going on for the better part of a week, and demanded his payment in full. The mayor said, "We never made a deal with you, Upton. Maybe it was going to rain anyway without your hocus pocus. We're not paying you a penny." This time, old Uppity didn't argue. He went back to Rooster Ridge and piled on more logs and added more concoctions to that old fire. Purple and blue smoke billowed up from the chimney all day and all evening. When the lightning bolts lit up the sky, people could see Uppity tending that fire like a mother tending her newborn babe. 5 more inches drenched down the town that night. 5 more inches the next day. 5 more the morning after that. That night, the dam broke and the mayor's house was flooded up to the 3rd floor. He and his family floated their way to town hall in their bathtub. Half the town board was there already, yowling like a bunch of soggy cats. For once, everybody agreed on one thing. They had to get Uppity to stop his rainmaking. They floated their way to high ground, then slid their way through the mud up to the ridge. "Stop right there, Upton," the mayor shouted when they got to Uppity's place. "Have you no mercy?" Uppity smiled at the mayor. "Nice as you please." "I'm glad to see you admit that this weather's due to my rainmaking abilities," he told the mayor. "I take it you've brought my payment of $5,000 along?" Well, sir, this time the mayor's face turned purple. "I'm not paying you a penny, Upton. Now stop what you're doing or we'll have to stop you." "I'll stop," Uppity told them. The mayor and the board members and the sheriff all looked relieved until Upton added, "Pay me $10,000 and I'll stop right now." Uppity held a jar of crystals over the fire, ready to pour some more on. There was dead silence until, boom, a huge thunderbolt clattered overhead and the whole kit and caboodle made a beeline out of there. Uppity kept on mixing and pouring, not stopping to eat or sleep. He was an angry man ready to get his revenge on Garner County. But he wasn't the only angry man. Down the hill, the mayor gathered together the sheriff and the board and the farmers whose houses were washed away. They all slogged back up the ridge, mad as wet hens, or maybe drenched roosters. Yee-haw! They carried pitchforks and shovels and any mean-looking thing they could find, and they made a circle around Uppity and his fireplace. "What's the meaning of this?" Uppity asked. "You've got 5 minutes to pack up and get out of here. We want you across that county line tonight," the mayor growled at him. Uppity argued until the mayor pointed the sharp prongs of his pitchfork at him. "Here's your payment, Upton, if you don't get now." Well, Upton prepared to get. The sheriff's deputies had already dropped the bookcase onto the wagon along with the trunk full of clothes. The fancy furniture and crystal lamps got left behind. Uppity hopped onto the wagon, gave the reins a slap, and galloped toward the Garner County line. Halfway across the Garner River, the bridge collapsed, sending Uppity, his wagon, and his horse straight down into the churning waters. The wagon sank like a brick, and the horse was swept away. The bookcase landed upside down, and all the books and powders and whatnot were lost. But that old bookcase floated, and Uppity hung on for dear life as the water carried him downstream. He was moving so fast he never noticed when he passed the county line. After a while, the rain stopped. Next morning, as things started to dry up, the sheriff saw those books and bottles floating in the river and figured Upton was floating there too. His body was never found. Leastwise, not by anybody in Garner County. I found his body, but it was a living, breathing body. I was just a boy doing some fishing down where the Garner meets the Liberty Creek River. I'd never seen the river swelled up so, and I was young enough to think all the rain would bring the fish right to the surface. My eyes about bugged out of my head when I saw the floating bookcase. As I reached that fork where the rivers meet, the bookcase got caught up on some rocks. Henry Upton sat up and rubbed his eyes. Somewhere in the night, he flipped the bookcase over and floated the rest of the way lying inside, dozing safe as a chick in its nest. He was a muddy chick, though, mighty bedraggled. "Help pull me over, boy, quick!" Uppity yelled at me. I threw him a big stick, which he used to pull the bookcase closer. He jumped out and waded to shore, dragging the bookcase behind him. When I asked him what had happened, he said he'd tell me the whole story if I'd find him dry clothes and a hot meal and get him to the nearest train station. Seems Uppity was smart enough to sew his money into his coat, and he had plenty of it too, 'cause he'd earned money all over the USA making rain for folks in trouble. Folks who paid him plenty, unlike the folks in Garner. Ma cooked him dinner, Pa gave him some clothes, and the man said his rainmaking days were over and he was going to some island where it never rains a drop. He left the bookcase with us, and Pa took him to the train station, and that's the last I ever heard of one Henry Upton. Hee-haw, how's that for a wonder, boy? I couldn't tell if the story was over, because Cully kept on chuckling and slapping his knee. When I thought he was finished, I asked him, "Did Upton tell you how he did that rainmaking? You'd make a fortune if you could do it." "I never asked," Cully said. "If you'd seen that poor half-drowned critter peering up out of that bookcase, you wouldn't have asked either. I believe in leaving well enough alone, my boy." Just as I glanced up at his sagging ceiling, it gave a loud creak. Even calm old Sal jumped up, startled like, but Cully didn't blink an eye. "Still, that there's a wonder, ain't it? A wonder of the world." Cully stared up at his bookcase as if he was seeing it for the first time. "Held the secrets of the universe, saved a man's life, and it's holding up a house today." "A wonder," I said. After all, even the Great Pyramid never held up a man's house. I jotted the story down fast as rain began beating against the windows of the sagging shack. Poor Jeb was hunkered down under a piece of canvas that covered the woodpile when Sal and I finally came outside. "Did you get any chocolates?" he called out. "Something better. A wonder," I shouted back. "Come on, let's run." With Sal in the lead, we raced down between the raindrops, back down Yellow Dog Road. "It's a wonder you're still alive," Jeb told me along the way. "You don't know the half of it," I agreed.